Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today's video is uploaded only a couple of days after the Lost Records Bloom and Rage 1-year anniversary. If you're a fan of Life is Strange and story-based games in general, you've probably heard of Lost Records Bloom and Rage, which was created by Dontnod, the people who made the first and second Life is Strange games. I've actually covered Lost Records Bloom and Rage on my channel before. I did a deep dive / review of each tape and basically gave my thoughts on it as it came out. With the anniversary being so close by, I thought now would be a great time to talk about what is next for the series. The game is open to a sequel and very clearly wants one with how they ended off. So I figured we should talk about that. I've done videos like this about the Life is Strange franchise where I've asked what's next for the series and kind of reflected on the release of the game, the financial success, and the critical success. So I figured I would give Lost Records Bloom and Rage the same treatment. So without further ado, let's get into it. Lost Records Bloom and Rage came out on February 18th, 2025. It's really crazy to think that it came out that long ago. In my mind, it's still a very new game. First, we're going to go over the critical reception. While we don't know exactly what the budget of the game was, we can assume it was not exactly a AAA huge budget game simply because of the amount of marketing and also the scope of the game in general. So due to the game being a smaller game by comparison, it didn't get as much attention as it would have if it were released by, say, Deck 9 and Square Enix. So finding ratings and finding a lot of critical feedback is a little more sparse than normal. But I was still able to find some very well-established publications online that gave it reviews. Metacritic gave it a 75. Currently the user score sits at a 6.6. Analog Stick Gaming also gave it a 7.5. And not that I'm exactly a well-known or well-respected critic of these games, I initially gave the game a 7.5 out of 10. Now, my opinion has changed a lot on the game over time. My reason for the score that I gave it was because overall it was great. Playing the game, playing the experience was fantastic. The performances were great. I thought the writing was very solid and the atmosphere and tone was just, it was out of this world. It was very, very well done and the artistic direction was so clear, which is why ultimately the ending is what tanked its score. I felt that the endings had so much variation, and at the time there was a real feeling that your choices, while they did have consequences, it was hard to understand what did what. Even though you were super close with this person, they end up leaving in the adult timeline, and this happens even though you've gone this route. There was a bit of confusion on my part and on the part of many other gamers out there when the game initially released. I also had a lot of bugs with the game, particularly with its autosave and save function in general, which as someone who was trying to play through the game multiple times within a short period of time in order to work on the review, it was very, very frustrating. Now, obviously, the technical issues have since been patched, and there's been a bunch of patches, and now that we have a further understanding of the game, it's a little clearer how certain things impact the story. But my overall view is that with games like these, yes, it's great to have so much a sprawling ending with all these different things, but something that the writers and developers need to remember is that for each player there needs to feel like a clear through line of my choices caused this, rather than thinking about every little tiny outcome. Life is Strange only has 2 endings, really, and you don't get to see a lot of the consequences of your actions, but the thematic importance of those endings overshadows that, so people feel like they're really involved. There's a certain mixture of things that goes into that, and I don't think they quite stuck the landing with it, which is disappointing because, as I said, the themes of the game and the different routes you can take are so clear. I just wish they could have stuck the landing a little more. But honestly, looking back, I still really enjoy the game and really think it's a fantastic piece of writing and everything, really. When it came to awards, at the Game Awards, it was nominated for Games for Impact, which is essentially an award category for games that highlight social issues and try to make some sort of change. Things like LGBTQ issues, racial issues, things like that. The game that ended up winning was South of Midnight, which I fully think is great. It's something that's on my list. I really, really want to try it. One thing that I think is very important is that for the Game Developers' Choice Awards, the game won an honorable mention for Best Narrative, and Social Impact, which is very similar to Games for Change. So overall, the game was received positively. It had positive reviews. It wasn't seen as like the second coming, the greatest story-based narrative game of all time. It wasn't taken in that way, and it didn't sweep the awards, but it was still nominated and recognized by people outside of the industry and within the industry as well. I think that's great, especially for a game on a lower budget and a game that is having to compete against a lot of very established IPs. It's very difficult for these new IPs and new and unique ideas to really break into the mainstream gaming industry, which it's becoming way easier, but for a narrative game like that, it's very impressive what they were able to do. Which then brings us to the financial success of the game. With Square Enix and the videos I've done talking about the success of Double Exposure financially, we had access to a lot of material about the company and also reports of meetings within the company where they discussed the game's success and flat out called it a failure or things like that. In this case, we don't really have that because this is a smaller organization. We can still gather some information. It's just a little more speculation than I would have liked. But I was able to find a lot of great sources on Reddit that discussed it. Now, these numbers are from the release window of the game, and it's a little difficult to see the sales over time since then, which I will get to in a minute. But to begin, according to sources I have found, it sold 41,000 copies initially, which is around $1.2 million worth. That's definitely not knock your socks off, AAA, super duper release window kind of thing that you would expect. However, that's still very, very good for this game. What's really interesting here is the wish listing. About 200,000 people had the game in their Steam wish list. That's a whole extra group of people who were interested in waiting to see the response to the game and have possibly purchased it since then, or even when it's gone on sale. Now, the game's only really gone on sale recently due to the anniversary, which is also a good sign because Life is Strange Double Exposure and True Colors went on sale surprisingly soon after their releases due to how it performed financially. Now, I want to be clear, those games weren't technically financial failures, Double Exposure and True Colors, but they were failures internally because of how much money was spent on marketing, particularly on Double Exposure. Internally, they were viewed as flops because expectations that were extremely high and I would say unfair were put on those games. Like, they sold about equally, Double Exposure and True Colors, but because of the extra marketing and the extra expectations on Double Exposure, it was seen as a failure in comparison, when really it did fine for a story-based narrative game, which those games don't really rake in the money compared to a lot of other mainstream like shooter games and things like that that have multiple ways to bring in income. And I've said it before that I think Square Enix was misguided when they placed these high expectations on Double Exposure. Which brings us to the people at Don't Nod. Internally, they saw it as a success. One of the co-owners of Don't Nod bought 210,000 shares within the company. Now, this can be taken a couple of ways, but I'm going to take it as a positive. I think they had a very realistic outlook on how a game like Lost Records Bloom and Rage was going to sell. Not only were they realistic with the budget and the marketing budget, but also with the sales that they were going to get in return. I think they saw the sales that were really solid overall as a good sign for the future, that there is a fan base interested in this game and interested in this series. How did the shares come into play here? Well, I think they're seeing the success that could come from continuing this series. If they released another game, people have to go back and buy the first one, things like that. And so what do? They're buying more shares before they eventually go up in value, and other people want to invest in the company. The game didn't blow up like the greatest thing ever, but it performed well enough to show that this series has the legs to succeed. Which, once again, to bring it back to Square Enix, is very different. While Double Exposure may not have performed exactly the same as something like Lost Records, it still performed well enough that if it were something like True Colors, which wasn't pushed nearly as much, it would have been considered a moderate success. But because of the expectations that were placed on it, it was viewed as a failure. It's really great to see the modest expectations and the understanding of what they're working with Lost Records, because I could very easily see them think, this is going to be the next Life is Strange. This is going to be the biggest hit ever. And then when it does okay, they get disappointed and they move on. I'm just very glad that things didn't go that route, and it seems very positive internally in Don't Nod. The other thing to consider with sales is that we don't know how many people have purchased it since the launch. And on top of that, Lost Records Bloom and Rage was available on the PlayStation Plus Premium subscription tier. So we don't really know what the financial agreement between Sony and Don't Nod was. If someone downloads that game, do they get a commission? Do they get a flat rate from Sony? We don't really know how that functions. There could be a whole other stream of income that we don't really have a full grasp of because of that. But I think it's safe to say that overall, internally, the game performed well and was seen as a moderate success and enough to build something on. And that's the big thing here. Lost Records is something they can build on. They can go the Life is Strange route and have a spin-off. They could continue with a direct sequel, which seems like what they want to do. But we can't have those conversations unless they view it as something viable, which thankfully with the success and with the internal view of it, it seems like it is, and it seems like we'll be getting more of this world. Now, what are we going to be getting in this world? I would say probably a direct sequel. I think the people at Don't Nod might be a little jaded with how things turned out with Square Enix and how Life is Strange was essentially taken from them from a certain point of view. They may not want to saturate things by having a DLC and then having another game and then doing a spin-off. I think they want to keep this story focused on the characters that we've grown to care about in the first game and just make a direct sequel. And it seems like they're gearing up to do that. The social media has been fairly active. I wish the main Don't Nod page would be more supportive of Lost Records rather than posting a lot of Life is Strange 1 content. Which is fine, I get it. But the Lost Records Instagram page has been active, and for this anniversary, they have a line of merch coming out, they have music releasing, and I don't think they would go through all this effort unless what I said earlier was true, and that they view this as a moderate success and a great base for a future series. So what do you guys think is going to happen next? Do you think they're going to do a DLC? Do you think they're going to do a direct sequel like I think they're going to do? Do you think that I'm correct in saying that it was a moderate success? Just let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or, whatever.